The moment I realized he had used me, it wasn't dramatic. There was no confession, no argument, no single event that made everything clear all at once. It was quieter than that. A realization that came too late, a pattern that suddenly made sense, a truth that had been there the whole time, hidden behind trust, ambition, and something that felt like opportunity. At first, I didn't want to believe it. Because when someone builds something with you, you assume you're part of it. You assume you matter. You assume your effort is valued, not exploited. But sometimes you're not a partner. You're a tool. And by the time you understand that, they've already taken what they needed. What happened to his company after that didn't feel like revenge. It felt like something much simpler. A structure collapsing under the same mindset that made it grow too fast in the first place. Stories like this are why people keep watching exposed stories media. Not because business failure is interesting. Because behind every sudden collapse, there's usually a long period where the truth was ignored, redirected, or hidden behind confidence. And once you see that clearly, nothing that happens after feels sudden anymore. His name was Aaron. We met through a mutual contact during a small consulting project. At the time, his company was just beginning to grow. Not large, not well known, but promising. He had energy. That was the first thing people noticed. He spoke quickly, confidently, and with a kind of certainty that made even incomplete ideas sound fully formed. That kind of confidence attracts attention. It also attracts trust. He told me he was building something scalable, a logistics coordination platform focused on optimizing mid-tier distribution networks. At least, that's how he described it. What mattered more was how he made it sound, like it was already working, like the future was already decided, and like the only question was who would be part of it early enough to benefit. At that point in my life, I was open to new opportunities. I had experience in operational analysis and process optimization. Nothing flashy, but useful. I understood systems. I understood inefficiencies. And more importantly, I understood where growth could break if it wasn't managed properly. That's why he wanted me involved. At least, that's what he said. He told me I saw things others missed. He said he needed someone who could help stabilize operations while he focused on scaling. That made sense. At first, because early-stage businesses often need balance. Vision without structure collapses. Structure without vision stagnates. Together, they work. Or at least, that's the idea. So I joined. Not as an employee. Not exactly as a partner. Somewhere in between. Flexible role. Undefined boundaries. That should have been the first warning. But it didn't feel like one at the time. Because everything was moving fast. New clients. New contracts. New conversations about expansion. And in that kind of environment, clarity often gets replaced by momentum. At first, everything looked promising. Revenue increased. Operations expanded. The system we built together started working. Not perfectly, but well enough. Aaron took credit for the growth. That's normal. He was the face of the company. But I didn't mind. Because I believed I was part of something real. Something that would eventually recognize contribution. That belief lasted longer than it should have. The first sign something was wrong wasn't obvious. It was subtle. A shift in how Aaron spoke to me. At first, he asked questions. Then he started giving instructions. Then he stopped explaining decisions altogether. That progression matters. Because it shows how roles change without being acknowledged. I went from being involved to being used. Gradually, quietly, without discussion. I started noticing other things too. Decisions made without input. Changes implemented without review. Commitments made that didn't align with operational capacity. When I asked about them, the answers were always the same. It's under control. We'll adjust later. Focus on execution. Those phrases sound confident. They also hide problems. Because execution without alignment creates instability. And instability doesn't show immediately. It builds. Then it breaks. I started tracking things more closely. Not officially, personally, because something felt off. And when something feels off in a growing business, it usually is. What I found didn't look like failure. It looked like strain. Cash flow didn't match reported growth. Operational capacity was being pushed beyond sustainable limits, and some of the projections being discussed publicly didn't match what I saw internally. That's when I understood something important. The company wasn't growing cleanly. It was stretching. And stretched systems don't hold forever. They break. I raised concerns. Privately. Directly. Aaron listened. But nothing changed. Because by then, he wasn't looking for balance. He was looking for speed. And speed doesn't tolerate resistance. That's when everything started shifting. Not visibly. Not yet. But internally, the structure was already weakening. And I didn't realize it yet. But I was part of the reason it had lasted as long as it did. Because I had been holding things together. Without realizing I was the only one doing it. The realization didn't come all at once. It came in pieces. Small moments that didn't make sense on their own. Until they did. The first real moment happened during a client meeting. Aaron was presenting a new expansion plan. Bigger contracts. Faster delivery timelines. Higher projected margins. Everything sounded impressive. Too impressive. Because I knew what it actually took to support those numbers. And the company wasn't there yet. Not operationally. Not financially. After the meeting, I asked him how we planned to handle the increased demand. He didn't answer directly. He said we would figure it out. That answer matters. Because serious operations don't rely on figuring it out after commitments are made. They rely on preparation. That's when I understood something. He wasn't building the company based on what was possible. He was building it based on what he could sell. And those are not the same thing. I started paying attention differently. Not as someone involved. As someone observing. And the pattern became clear. He was using my work to support his narrative. The systems I built. The processes I refined. The efficiencies I created. They weren't being used to stabilize growth. They were being used to justify expansion. That's the difference. And that difference changes everything. Because once systems become a tool for appearance instead of reality, collapse becomes inevitable. I confronted him. Not aggressively. Just directly. I told him the growth wasn't sustainable. I told him the numbers didn't align. I told him we needed to slow down. He didn't argue. He dismissed. He said I was too focused on limitations. He said I didn't understand how scaling works. Then he said something that stayed with me. You build systems. I build opportunities. That was the moment everything became clear. Because it showed how he saw me. Not as a partner. Not as someone essential. As a function. A tool. Something useful. But replaceable. That realization changed everything. I stopped trying to fix things. I stopped trying to correct direction. I stopped believing I was part of the company's future. Because I understood something important. I had already served my purpose. He had used my work to build structure. Now he was using that structure to move faster than it could support. And I was no longer necessary. So I stepped back. Quietly. No conflict. No announcement. Because by then, I knew what was coming. And I didn't want to be part of it. The first sign of collapse came 2 weeks later. A major client pulled back. Not completely, but enough to create pressure. That pressure exposed everything. Cash flow tightened. Operations strained. Timelines slipped. Then another issue appeared. Suppliers started pushing back. Shorter terms, less flexibility, more pressure. That created a cycle. And once that cycle starts, it accelerates. Because every problem makes the next one harder to solve. Aaron tried to maintain the narrative. Publicly, everything was still on track. Privately, everything was shifting. That's how collapse begins. Not with failure, with contradiction. And once contradiction becomes visible, confidence disappears. The collapse felt sudden to everyone else. To me, it didn't, because I had already seen it coming. The structure had been unstable for months. It just hadn't been visible yet. Once it became visible, everything moved quickly. Clients withdrew. Contracts were renegotiated. Revenue dropped. And the same growth that once looked impressive became a liability. Because growth without stability amplifies failure. Aaron called me after the first major loss. Not casually. Seriously. He asked if I had seen what was happening. I said yes. Then he asked what he should do. That question came too late. Because by then, the problem wasn't direction. It was consequence. I told him the truth. That the company had grown beyond what it could support. That the systems weren't designed for what he promised. That the decisions he made couldn't be reversed quickly enough. He listened. For the first time. But listening late doesn't change outcomes. That's what people don't understand. You don't fix collapse when it starts. You prevent it before it begins. He asked if I would come back. Help stabilize things. Fix what could be fixed. I said no. Not because I wanted him to fail. Because I understood something clearly. The problem wasn't operational. It was mindset. And you can't fix mindset with systems. That's what he never understood. The business didn't disappear overnight. But it changed. Smaller, weaker, less trusted. And most importantly, no longer growing. Because once trust is lost, growth becomes impossible. What happened to him wasn't revenge. It wasn't karma. It was consequence. The same decisions that allowed the company to grow quickly also made it fragile. And fragile things don't survive pressure. My role in the story ended before the collapse. That matters. Because it shows something important. I wasn't the cause. I was the support. And once the support was no longer there, the structure couldn't hold. That's not about me. That's about the system. And systems always reveal the truth eventually. My relationship with Aaron never recovered. Not because of what happened at the end. Because of what I understood in the middle. That I had never really been part of what he was building. I was part of how he built it. And those are not the same thing. Stories like this are why exposed stories media exists. Because behind every sudden failure, there is always a period where the truth was visible but ignored. And every time that truth is dismissed, the outcome becomes harder to avoid. If there is one lesson in this story, it is this. Pay attention to how people use you. Not what they say. Not what they promise. What they do. Because sometimes, the role you think you have isn't the role you're actually playing. And by the time you realize it, they've already taken everything they needed. He used me to grow his business. And when the foundation couldn't support what he built on top of it, everything fell apart. Not suddenly, not unfairly, exactly the way it was always going to. And once you understand that, you understand everything.